Welcome to Dreamy History as the day draws to a close and your mind begins to slow. This hour is just for you, a time to step back, drift gently into the rhythms of the past, and let the gentle lull of ancient times ease you toward rest. Before we begin, make sure you're comfortable. Dim the lights, nestle under a soft blanket, and if your thoughts wander, that's perfectly okay. Let them follow the steady pace of this quiet history. Tonight, we travel to a quiet corner of the ancient world, a place not marked by battles or kings, but by the careful hands of ordinary people, shaping Earth into memory. This is a complete overview of ancient Greek pottery-making techniques, a slow, gentle journey through clay and kiln, through form and function, through a craft that echoed across centuries. Now, breathe deeply and let us begin. The first light of day in the Kerameikos district of ancient Athens arrives not with fanfare, but with the slow, deliberate shift of shadows along worn stone pathways. The air is cool and dry, heavy with the earthy scent of dust, mingled faintly with the residual smoke of last night's hearth fires. It is early, before the main city has stirred, and only the occasional distant bleating of goats or the low bray of a donkey marks the horizon of sound. Here, in this area long known for its potters, the rhythm of the day does not wait for inspiration or urgency. It simply resumes, as it did the day before, and as it will the day after. A middle-aged potter steps out from his modest workshop. His robe is coarse and unadorned, bearing faint stains of iron-rich clay from weeks past. His sandals scuff against the compacted soil, still cold from the night. The beams of morning sun catch in his beard, flecked with gray and clay dust alike. He stretches not from discomfort, but from habit. His shoulders roll back slowly, creaking slightly, shaped by years of repetitive labor at the wheel. The joints in his fingers crack gently as he flexes them. These hands, now weathered and thick-knuckled, have shaped hundreds of vessels, amphorae, craters, kylix, hydriol, destined for wine, water, oil, or burial. He does not think of the artistry in his work. He thinks only of the tasks ahead. Around him, his apprentices stir. One, a boy of no more than 12, carries a small jar of olive oil to the hearth. Another, slightly older, sweeps yesterday's shavings and trimmings from the courtyard floor into a clay basin. Neither speaks. Their movements are slow, functional, and familiar. The tools are lined against the wall loop, tools shaping paddles, smoothing stones, all handmade, all worn down by years of use. Each tool, like each vessel they make, is utilitarian above all else. They are not polished, they are not replaced, unless they break entirely. They are, in every sense, good enough. In the distance, a neighbor's donkey cart rattles faintly across flagstones. A chorus of indistinct murmurs floats from the direction of the central well. But here, in the potter's quarter, there is no rush to begin. The day will be long. The clay must be prepared. The wheel must be oiled. The kiln must be swept, its interior examined for cracks that might have formed in the cooling. All of it will be done, but not yet. The potter runs his thumb slowly along a crack in the outer wall of the workshop. It's been there for years, perhaps decades, slowly widening with seasonal changes in moisture and heat. He considers patching it, but does not act on the thought. Instead, he turns back toward the doorway. The fire in the hearth must be lit again, not for warmth, but to heat water for softening old slip, the mixture of refined clay used for painting. The slip is not decorative, it is functional. It changes under heat, hardens into sheen, survives time. The potter does not know the chemistry, but he knows the process. The morning has arrived, not with excitement, but with certainty. The same certainty as yesterday, the same certainty as the day before. The rhythm of the potter's life continues, shaped slowly, like the vessels he will create. In the shaded area just beyond the workshop, the potter and his apprentice begin one of the most fundamental and repetitive tasks of the day, preparing the raw clay. This process does not vary much from day to day. First, the large earthen baskets filled with clay, sourced from nearby riverbeds, are brought out into the light. The clay is dry and coarse, still containing small stones, bits of organic matter, and unevenly sized granules. The potter slowly sifts the clay through fine mesh woven from reeds, a method passed down from potter to potter over generations. The finer material falls through. The larger fragments are discarded. Once sifted, the clay is added to a large trough already filled with water. There, they begin kneading the mixture using their feet. The movements are slow, heavy, repetitive. Press, pull, turn, press, again. Over the next hour, the clay becomes smooth, pliable, and ready for forming. Inside the workshop, the potter sits on a low stool, facing his turning wheel. The wheel is not mechanical, but driven by foot, using a lower platform that must be kicked or spun gently to keep it moving. The process of forming a vessel is not fast. The wheel spins at a deliberate pace, and the potter's hands, moistened just enough to maintain control, rest gently on the mound of clay. He begins by centering the clay, a process that requires patience. Then, slowly, he draws the clay upward, forming the base, the neck, and then the widening curve of a kalexa drinking cup, common in Athens. His thumbs shape the inner wall, while his fingers guide the outer form. The motion is calm and unchanging. Nothing is rushed. A small tool smooths the rim. The apprentice watches closely, but says nothing. Each movement is part of a larger sequence, repeated daily, unchanged for generations. After being shaped on the wheel, the vessels are left to dry slightly in a shaded area of the workshop. This drying process takes place over several hours, sometimes a day or more, depending on the humidity. The vessels cannot be moved prematurely, or they may collapse. Once the clay is leather hard, not fully dry, but no longer pliable, the potter takes each piece and places it on a small, rotating platform. With a metal loop tool, he carefully trims the base, refining the foot of the vessel. Excess clay is scraped away gently and collected for reuse. The surface is smoothed with a piece of soft leather or a rounded stone. Each stroke is repetitive, methodical, and slow. The vessel does not yet resemble art. It is still a utility. In the background, other pots sit in quiet rows, all waiting their turn. The process is quiet, and the rhythm is unchanging. As daylight fades and the evening approaches, attention turns to the kiln. The potter and his assistants begin preparing the firing chamber. The kiln is built of mud brick and clay, shaped like a beehive with a domed roof. Inside, stacks of partially dried vessels are arranged in careful layers, larger pots on the bottom, smaller pieces above. Spacers made of discarded shards separate them, allowing airflow during the firing. Once loaded, the entrance is sealed with slabs of clay. Kindling is placed below in the firebox, pine wood, olive branches, and other slow-burning fuel. The fire is lit slowly, carefully, and must be tended constantly for hours. There are no flames visible from outside, only the faint glow of heat and the occasional hiss of steam. No one speaks. The kiln begins to hum with life. It must reach a temperature high enough to harden the clay, but not so high that it cracks. The potter and his sons, and perhaps a slave or two, sit on low stones outside the kiln. They do not leave the fire unattended. Through the night, someone must always watch the heat, feed the flame, and monitor the changing color of the vent smoke. If it turns to black, they reduce the fuel. If the kiln cools too fast, they add dry pine. The firing takes many hours, sometimes more than a day. They sit in silence, sometimes dozing briefly, but never too far from the warmth. The smell of burning wood clings to their tunics. Their eyes water slightly from the smoke. The vessels inside shift imperceptibly as heat penetrates the clay. The potter occasionally stands, checks a vent, stirs the fire, then returns to his seat. There is no excitement in this vigilantly steady observation, repetition, and the slow passing of time beneath the stars. With the coming of dawn, the fire is allowed to die. The kiln remains hot for many hours, even after the flames are gone. Slowly, the potter removes the sealed clay door. Heat escapes in gentle waves. Inside, the vessels, now fully fired, sit quietly. Some have cracked, this is expected. Others show minor warping or discoloration where the heat rose unevenly. But many are whole, complete, and ready for painting or use. Their surfaces are hard to the touch. Their color, a deep reddish orange. The slip used on painted vessels has turned a uniform black. The process is done. Each pot is removed with care and placed on wooden racks to cool further. The potter does not examine each piece in detail yet. That will come later. For now, it is enough that the fire has completed its work. The workshop smells of ash and clay, familiar and comforting in its repetition. There is no rest after the firing. The potter returns to his seat. The wheel is cleaned. The clay basin is filled again. A new vessel is formed. The process, unchanged, repeats. The kiln is now cooling, its interior dark and still. The fired pots sit in silence. Some will be painted, others will be sold as is. There is no ceremony, no recognition, only the continuation of work. The apprentices resume their sweeping. The potter's hands, still dusted with traces of fired clay, once again press into the soft mound on the wheel. The air warms as the sun rises higher. Another day begins, indistinguishable from the last. Each day is the same. Clay is prepared, formed, fired, and cooled. The rhythm of the potter's life is not made of change, but of constancy. The wheel turns again and again and again. In the quiet halls of archaeological museums and storage archives, the name Nikosthenes appears not in ink, nor in inscription upon stone, but gently pressed into the base of pottery, sometimes centered, sometimes off to one side. Always the same phrase, Nikosthenes e poison, meaning simply, Nikosthenes made me. The mark is not flamboyant. It is not overly large. It is pressed into wet clay, while still soft, and fired into permanence. Dozens upon dozens of such vessels have been found, all bearing this humble statement. Nikosthenes did not write about his work. No record of his words or voice remains. But through this quiet, repetitive inscription, his presence extends through time. Each vessel is similar, but never identical. Small differences in curvature, slip thickness, or handle form. These pots were not ceremonial masterpieces. They were merchandise, practical objects produced by a workshop concerned with volume, consistency, and meeting demand. And yet, the name survives, embedded in fired clay that was never meant to last forever. It speaks not of fame, but of continuity, of one man's place in a long tradition of anonymous hands at the wheel. Nicosthenes lived and worked during a time of stylistic and commercial transition. The late 6th century BCE marked the gradual decline of the black figure style and the growing popularity of the red figure technique, which allowed for greater detail and more realistic depictions of the human form. His workshop, likely located in Athens, would have been modest in size, but organized with efficiency. Alongside the potters were painters, apprentices, and perhaps slaves, all engaged in the same repeated tasks: kneading clay, forming vessels, applying slip, stacking for firing. Nicosthenes is often credited not with inventiveness, but with responsiveness. His work shows a clear tendency to adjust form and style to reflect the changing preferences of foreign buyers, especially the Etruscans of central Italy. His amphorae, in particular, mirror those favored in Etruscan markets: wider bodies, flared lips, and decorative elements with specific appeal. He did not follow fashion. He anticipated it, or at the very least, recognized its arrival. Through repetitive form and quiet adaptability, Nicosthenes ensured that his vessels would reach distant ports and varied households, not as rare treasures, but as dependable goods. The Etruscan influence on Nicosthenes' work is undeniable. The amphorae he produced in large quantities were distinctly different from traditional Attic shapes. These vessels featured broad shoulders, narrow bases, and a flanged rim forms, more typical of Etruscan rather than Athenian tastes. Yet he made them anyway, in great numbers, for the purpose of export. His workshop catered to a market over 600 miles away. He likely never traveled there, yet his pots arrived consistently, carried in merchant ships, stored in crates of straw, traded for grain, wine, or silver. The forms were replicated so many times that their slight variations became a catalogue of function over flair. It was not just the shapes that changed. Even the imagery adapted, with figures and motifs adjusted to reflect Etruscan preferences, scenes of banquets, funerals, and myth. These were not works of art as we might imagine them. They were products, responsive to demand. Yet, in their uniformity, they carried a kind of quiet elegance. Nicosthenes did not create them alone. He directed others, but the guiding vision was his: persistent, measured, and economically aware. What distinguishes Nicosthenes from countless other Athenian potters is not only the volume of his output, but the regularity with which his name appears. Over 100 vessels bearing his signature have been identified by modern scholars, and it is likely many more once existed. These pots are not lavish or extravagant. They follow consistent patterns, familiar forms, standard dimensions, recognizable features. They were likely made in multiples, perhaps by different hands, but under a single method. It is unclear whether Nicosthenes threw the pots himself or simply oversaw their production. Most likely, he did both, depending on the day, the order, or the scale of demand. The presence of his name on the pots does not signify authorship in a modern artistic sense. It implies accountability, workshop identification, and perhaps a quiet assertion of consistency. These vessels, so similar in function, are tied together by this one repeated element: his name. In a world where few artisans were named, and even fewer remembered, Nicosthenes left his name, not in stories, but in clay, fired, cooled, and eventually unearthed by patient hands centuries later. Nicosthenes' legacy is not marked by monuments or lavish tombs. There are no surviving statues, no written accounts describing his life. What remains is an archive of function vessels that traveled far, were used by many, and have been studied by modern hands. His success was not celebrated, but measured in repetition. His work did not aspire to singular greatness, but to dependable utility. It is possible he employed numerous assistants. It is likely he maintained relationships with traders and buyers, but the details are vague. What is known is that his name persisted across time and geography, returning to Athens, passing into archaeological records. His pots may have held wine at feasts, oil in temples, or ashes in graves. Their journeys were varied, but all began in the same place, his workshop. His fame, such as it is accidental, a byproduct of his consistency, not his intention. He made pots, many of them, with a name pressed quietly beneath each pat. They remain, still, as quiet markers of a man who worked, observed, and endured. After Nicosteine's death, his workshop may have been taken over by others, perhaps apprentices, family members, or business partners. The forms he favored did not disappear. Instead, they were imitated, refined, and continued under the hands of others. What modern scholars call Nicostenic amphorae are not all made by him, yet they follow his designs. The name became a category, not a signature. This continuity suggests that what he built was not just a series of pots, but a method, a model of responding to external markets, of adjusting form while preserving quality. The vessels lived beyond him. They were found in tombs, cellars, and refuse pits. Some were reused, others shattered and scattered, yet the shape, the aesthetic, and the function endured. In textbooks, Nicosteine's name appears frequently, sometimes underlined, sometimes footnoted, but in his own time, he was likely just one among many, notable only for the scale of his workshop and the consistency of his output. And so his legacy rests, not in grandeur, but in imitation, repetition, without recognition, continued usefulness, and the silent endurance of clay. Nicosteine's stands as a representative of an entire class of craftsmen, those whose names are unknown, whose tools have vanished, and whose work survives only as fragments in the soil. For every signed vessel, there are hundreds more unsigned. For every workshop identified by archaeologists, dozens remain untraced. Yet all of them, known and unknown, contributed to the vast ceramic output of the Greek world. These potters did not write manifestos. They did not dictate their methods. Their skills were passed through demonstration, not instruction. They worked long hours, repeated the same tasks, shaped the same forms. Their lives were not exceptional in the way history often prefers. They were ordinary, and that ordinary is repetitive, unnoticed. Patient is what allowed their work to last. The rhythm of their lives is preserved in the repetition of shape and technique, in the glaze that darkened in the kiln, and in the fragments still found beneath modern cities. Nicosteine's is remembered not for being extraordinary, but for being quietly, consistently present in clay. The clay used by Attic potters was not chosen for beauty, but for reliability. Sourced from the rich deposits surrounding Athens, this clay possessed a natural concentration of iron oxide, invisible to the eye when wet, but deeply influential during firing. When left in its natural state, the clay was a pale, earthy brown, sometimes tinged with yellow or gray, but under heat it changed. The potters did not use the terms ferric oxide or oxidation, but they observed the results. Over time, they learned through repetition that this specific clay when combined with precise temperature changes and careful control of air, could yield a red or black surface without the addition of paint or glaze. It was the same clay used for the body of the pot and the decorative slip, just applied in different ways, then subjected to specific firing conditions. The chemistry was unspoken. The process was shared not in writing, but by example, passed down from one generation to the next. The results appeared in the finished vessels, but the method remained hidden in the quiet, glowing interior of the kiln. The first stage of firing began once the kiln reached high temperatures and was allowed to remain open to the air. In this state, oxygen moved freely through the chamber, circulating around the vessels stacked inside. As the temperature climbed beyond 800 degrees Celsius, the iron in the clay underwent a transformation. It bonded with oxygen from the air, producing a red coloration across the surface of every pot. This was not accomplished by brushing pigment or staining the clay. It was a chemical response to heat and airflow. The pots turned a reddish-orange uniform and vivid. The potters did not measure temperature with instruments. Instead, they watched the color of the flames, the behavior of the smoke, and the hue of the clay as it reacted to the environment. This phase could last several hours. Timing was essential. If the phase ended too soon, the red would not fully develop. If it continued too long, the vessels could crack. The kiln remained open, glowing from within, and the potters waited. This was not innovation, was repetition, learned through trial, error, and silent observation. Following the oxidation phase, the kiln entered its second stage, known today as the reduction phase. This required sealing the kiln, closing all vents, blocking openings, and drastically reducing the supply of oxygen. The potters did this by adding damp fuel such as green wood or brush soaked in water, which produced smoke rather than flame. The atmosphere inside the kiln changed completely. With little oxygen available, the chemical balance within the clay shifted. The red iron oxide lost its oxygen, transforming into a black iron compound. This caused the entire surface of the pot to turn black. But a more significant transformation occurred with the slip, the refined clay applied as decoration. The slip had a slightly different texture and reacted more intensely to the altered atmosphere, vitrifying under heat. Its particles fused tightly, becoming dense and resistant to further chemical change. The vessels remained in this state for a carefully observed period, while the potters listened to the kiln, noting subtle changes in pressure, heat, and smoke. There were no tools to measure the reaction. There was only time, routine, and memory. In the third and final phase, the potters reopened the kiln, allowing fresh air to rush back into the firing chamber. This sudden reintroduction of oxygen had a specific, targeted effect. The exposed clay, the parts of the pot not covered in slippy, began to revert. Oxygen bonded once more with the iron particles, and the red coloration returned. However, the vitrified slip had been fundamentally changed. It no longer responded to air or heat in the same way. Its surface remained dense, sealed, and black. The result was a sharp contrast between red and black areas on the vessel, all achieved without separate pigments or paints. This reoxidation stage had to be timed precisely. Too soon, and the slip could also begin to lighten. Too late, and the clay might cool too quickly, cracking from stress. The kiln walls held the heat for hours. The potters monitored the shift in color, the scent of the air, and the sound of the fire. There were no written instructions, only tradition. The effect was subtle but consistent, produced not by design but by practice. Despite the precision of the three-phase firing process, no surviving ancient Greek text describes it. No potter's manual has ever been found. There are no scrolls or inscriptions listing the steps. All that exists are the finished vessels, some perfect, others flawed, and the indirect evidence of trial and error. The knowledge was transmitted through action. Young apprentices watched their elders prepare the kiln, listened to their instructions, mimicked their movements. Over time, they internalized the method. It was not a technique that invited variation or personal flair. It was mechanical, dependable, and nearly invisible. Even the potters may not have understood the full chemical reaction taking place inside their kilns. They knew only that the process worked and that certain conditions produced specific results. This silence, this absence of documentations, speaks to the deeper nature of their craft. It was practical, it was repetitive, it was meant to be done, not written. The vessels are the only record, and through their surfaces, modern scholars have reconstructed a method that was never spoken aloud, never debated, only performed, again and again. In the modern era, archaeologists and ceramic specialists spent years attempting to replicate the ancient three-phase firing process. Without written records, they relied on indirect evidence: the color of ancient pots, the shape of kiln fragments, soot patterns, and observations from living traditions in rural pottery communities. Scholars like Joseph Noble and David Gill built replica kilns based on remains found in Athens and elsewhere. They collected clay from similar sources, shaped vessels in traditional forms, and experimented with controlled firings. Early attempts failed. Pots cracked, colors came out wrong, slip flaked off. But slowly, through patient adjustment and repetitive trials, the ancient method was reconstructed. The breakthrough came not from advanced equipment, but from accepting the constraints of the original process: wood fuel, manual control of temperature, natural airflow. The resulting vessels matched the ancient ones, not only in color, but in texture and composition. This process of rediscovery confirmed what the Greeks had known without needing to write it down: that practice, attention, and repetition could produce reliable results. And in the absence of manuals, that was enough. The three-phase firing method is remarkable not for its complexity, but for its consistency. The same steps: oxidation, reduction, reoxidation, were repeated for centuries with minimal alteration. The knowledge was practical and embodied. Each potter learned by observing. Each workshop followed the same order. There was little room for experimentation. The success of the process relied on staying within the known pattern. The kiln itself was a vessel of memory, its walls recording past firings through layers of soot and ash. Every time it was used, it taught again. The potters did not innovate, they maintained. Their tools were few: fire, clay, air. Their actions were quiet, deliberate, and unchanged. The slip was applied with care. The stacking of pots followed specific logic. The timing of vent closures was intuitive, shaped by habit. No master spoke aloud each step. No apprentice took notes. The tradition was silent, carried in hands, not words. And in this silence, across generations, the knowledge survived. Not because it was remarkable, but because it was repeatable. And in the world of pottery, that was all that mattered. On every ancient Greek vessel, even those admired today in museums, are subtle signs of the kiln. These marks are not flaws. They are evident, silent witnesses to the three-phase process. A patch of uneven coloration might indicate that part of the pot was shielded during reoxidation. A thin line of red where black should be may reflect a brief delay in vent sealing. The potters noticed these, though they likely did not dwell on them. A pot with such marks was still usable, still saleable, still whole. The slip, when applied too thickly, bubbled. When too thin, it faded. These irregularities were expected. No pot was perfect. The important thing was that it functioned, held liquid, and passed the basic test of endurance. The fire left other traces, slight warping in the lip, glazed streaks along the shoulder, or a faint sheen caused by heat intensity. Modern archaeologists examine these signs to understand ancient kilns, but to the potters, they were part of the process, not problems, not mysteries, just the result of fire, time, and repetition. To the ancient potter, the kiln was both a tool and a challenge. It was predictable only within limits. The same fuel, the same stacking method, the same timing could still yield varied results. Some pots came out perfect, others failed inexplicably, and so the kiln was approached with caution and respect. It was not feared, but it was never trusted completely. Its inner workings could not be seen. Only the exterior revealed clues: the heat of the walls, the color of escaping smoke, the sound of crackling wood. These signs were observed carefully, not as science, but as ritual. The potter might say the kiln was good today, or difficult this week. These were not superstitions, but recognitions of the kiln's living nature. Like an oracle, it offered no explanations, only outcomes. When it performed well, it was thanked quietly. When it failed, there was no anger, only more clay, more fuel, another try. The kiln did not speak, but its results were read every day by men who understood that silence often says more than words. Once the firing process was complete and the kiln had cooled, a certain stillness settled over the workshop. The fire no longer crackled, the air no longer shimmered with heat. What remained was warmth that would fade slowly over hours. The potter opened the kiln cautiously, letting out air that still carried the scent of wood smoke. Inside, the vessels sat quietly, their surfaces now set, their forms permanent. The colors, deep red, jet black, were no longer changing, they were fixed. The kiln, once full of flame and motion, was now just a shell. The pots, once soft and fragile, were now strong, enduring, silent. They would be removed one at a time, checked, tapped, and set aside. The process was not celebrated, it was simply done, and soon the kiln would be swept, restacked, and prepared again. The rhythm never paused for long, but in that brief stillness after the fire, the potters recognized the end of one cycle and the quiet beginning of the next. The silence was complete. The clay had been transformed. In a modest Athenian home, a simple hydria sat on a worn wooden shelf. The hydria was neither painted nor polished, and it bore no mythological scene or decorative flourish. Its surface, once smoother, now showed the dullness of repeated handling water stains near the rim. A chip on one handle, and the fine scratching caused by countless refills from the well. The woman who used it, likely the mother of the household, rose early every morning. Her first task was to walk to the public fountain house, wait her turn, and fill the hydria with fresh water. The shape of the hydria, with 3 handles, 1 for pouring and 2 for lifting, made it suitable for this daily journey. Balancing it on her hip or carrying it across her back, she returned home in quiet steps, repeating the same action performed by hundreds of others. The hydria was essential, yet unremarkable. It was not admired for its design. It was not preserved for future eyes. It served its function day after day, until eventually it cracked or leaked and was replaced. But for the time it endured, it was part of the rhythm of domestic life, steady, repetitive, and necessary. In the bustling agora, the central marketplace of Athens, pottery was present in almost every direction. Stalls displayed stacks of undecorated bowls, jugs, and amphorae. Vendors, many of them local potters or their apprentices, arranged vessels not by aesthetic, but by shape and use. There were pots for wine, pots for oil, pots for grain, and others for perfumes or honey. The amphorae, tall and narrow, with looped handles, were favored for storage and transport. The smaller arabelloi, rounded and compact, held scented oils. The market-goers moved slowly, inspecting the wares. Haggling was quiet, deliberate, based not on appearance but utility. Pottery was not rare, it was essential. It accompanied every trade use to carry goods from one stall to another, to transport offerings, or to deliver payments in kind. Some pieces were reused, others left behind or broken during transit. The ground of the agora was littered with fragments, evidence of the constant movement of goods in clay. No one mourned a broken pot. It was simply swept away. But each new piece purchased marked another cycle begun, another hand grasping a handle, another pot returning home to begin again its silent task of service. In the shaded interior of a wealthy Athenian home, a symposium was underway. This was not merely a drinking party, but a structured gathering, often male only, where conversation, music, and games accompanied the slow, ritualized consumption of diluted wine. Central to this ritual were the pots, the kylix, a shallow cup with looping handles used for drinking, and the oinocho, a graceful jug for pouring. Each of these vessels was carefully selected, decorated with scenes from myth or daily life, and displayed prominently during the event. The imagery was not just ornamentally served as conversation. Guests reclined on couches, sipping from kylix painted with Dionysian figures, satyrs, or Heracles in battle. Yet the potter's name, if signed at all, was rarely mentioned. The pot was an object of refinement, but also of function, passed from hand to hand, emptied and refilled. It might be admired for its symmetry or polish, but it was still a tool. When the symposium ended, the pots were cleaned, stored, and used again. Their life was repetitive, elegant, and deeply embedded in elite custom. Near the hearth, in the same wealthy home, a young slave moved carefully. In his hands, he carried a lekithos, narrow-necked vessel used to store precious oils. This lekithos, unlike the crater or kylix, was fragile and slim, painted with delicate black figure decoration. Its content was equally valuable. Scented oil, imported from distant lands. The slave's movements were deliberate. A stumble or spill could mean scolding or worse. He tilted the vessel slightly, pouring a measured stream into a shallow dish. He did not own the pot. He would not drink from it or fill it with his own oil. His task was only to serve, yet the pot still passed through his hands, as it did for many like him. Pottery, regardless of its beauty or fineness, was part of every level of the household. For the elite, it offered culture and refinement. For the slave, it represented responsibility and risk. When the lekithos was empty, it would be returned to its place. If it broke, another would be acquired. But the hands that carried it would remain the same, quiet, unnoticed, essential. At the gymnasium, under the open sky and among shaded colonnades, young men trained in athletics. They ran, wrestled, and threw the discus. Between exercises, they paused to drink water or apply oil to their skin. Rituals of cleansing, as much as refreshment. A tall jug sat nearby, its form simple and undecorated, likely filled with cool water fetched earlier in the day. Another vessel, an arabolos, held olive oil for massage. These vessels were not part of elite gatherings or formal ceremonies. They were practical, placed on the stone ground, used and reused without comment. The pot's surface grew slick from repeated contact with hands and skin. The jug was handled dozens of times, sometimes left in the sun, sometimes cooled in shade. Its life was repetitive, carried, set down, refilled. It did not change. The athletes, young and strong, moved quickly, but the pots remained slow, passive observers. At the end of the day, they were returned to storage or left in place. Their role was to serve, not to impress. Their value was not in decoration, but in being there when needed. Beyond the daily routines of home and gymnasium, pottery also held ritual purpose. In cemeteries outside the city walls, lekythoi were placed near graves. These vessels, often finely painted, held oil for the dead. Their imagery was somber: processions, farewells, scenes of parting. They were not meant to be used again. Once emptied, they were buried or shattered intentionally. Some graves contained entire sets of pottery, small bowls, jars, and cups arranged carefully, not for function, but for symbolism. The clay preserved the gesture, even when the body decayed. In temples, offerings were made in vessels of clay, wine poured into a crater, oil lit in a lamp. The pot itself became part of the ritual. It held the sacred liquid, then rested among other offerings, stacked or scattered. These pots were not described in prayers or hymns. They were not named, but they were there, always. Their presence marked the act of giving, the gesture of farewell. Once used, they were left behind, their purpose fulfilled. No one retrieved them. They remained as silent participants in ceremonies no longer remembered, their surfaces touched once and then forgotten. Centuries later, deep beneath the surface of modern cities, archaeologists uncovered layers of refuse, old streets, collapsed homes, and underground drains. Among the most common discoveries were pottery fragments, shards of once whole amphorae, broken kylix, and cracked cooking pots lined the ancient sewer systems. These fragments had been discarded without ceremony. They were not placed, but dropped, swept, or carried by water through the city's underground channels. Many showed signs of wear: chips from daily use, burn marks from cooking, scratches from cleaning. Some still bore traces of residuous oil or bits of food. These were not ritual pieces. They were not fineware. They were the everyday tools of Athenian life, broken and forgotten. Yet, in their abandonment, they preserved a record of ordinary routine. Each piece told a small story of what was eaten, how water was stored, where waste was disposed. The sewer did not care, but the clay endured. And now, centuries later, the broken pieces are studied, catalogued, and quietly appreciated. They remain where once they were lost, speaking softly of lives lived without documentation, but not without detail. A single Vesela crater, for instance, might begin its life at the wheel, shaped by a potter's steady hands. Once fired, it might be sold in the marketplace, carried to a home, and used at a wedding to mix wine. Later, the same pot might be passed to another household, repurposed as a storage jar. Over years, its surface would grow dull, its decoration faded by sun and handling. A crack might form near the base. Someone would patch it with clay or wax. Still, it served. In time, perhaps it was taken to a funeral, used to pour libations for the dead. Afterward, It might be buried or left behind, or it might continue given to a servant, used in a workshop, placed in a storeroom. The pot would not speak of its journey, but each mark, each stain, each repair told part of its story. One vessel, many uses. One shape, many moments. The pot did not know its value. It only performed its task, and in doing so, it witnessed time without changing itself. It simply endured. Most potters are forgotten. Their names were never inscribed, their workshops never recorded. The pots they made, however, remain buried in soil, preserved in ash, rediscovered in fragments. Museums catalog them with codes and provenance. Scholars trace their origins, match designs, reconstruct missing parts. But the pot itself cannot explain who shaped it, who held it, or what it once contained. The details are lost, and yet, in its silence, the pot endures. It remains as evidence not of greatness, but of continuity. The same forms appear across cities, islands, and generations. The same curves, the same functions. Each pot, whether painted or plain, was made to be used, not preserved. Its survival is accidental, but in surviving, it speaks, not loudly, not clearly, but steadily. It reminds us that most of history is not recorded in words. It is recorded in objects, in things made by many hands, passed through many lives. The pot, unassuming, offers a quiet reflection, not of what was important to rulers or poets, but of what was necessary, again and again, every day. And now, as we bring our journey to a close, let the soft rhythm of the potter's wheel fade into the distance. The vessels, shaped, fired, used, and buried, have all told their story, not with words, but through presence, through silence, through repetition. From the dusty streets of Keramikos, to the firelit kilns, to the grand symposium and the forgotten sewer, each pot carried more than liquid, it carried time. Now, in your own quiet space, as you lay still beneath your blanket, let the steadiness of that ancient rhythm guide you. The past does not rush, it waits, and like the vessels of clay, you too can rest. Simple, still, enduring good night. From Dreamy History.